Is there anyone else who wishes to talk to us on chapter number 7? Okay, let's go back over chapter number 7. And Mr. Ray and Mr. Grindstaff, first referring to the staff open list and what is it, 1, 2, 3 items. 3 items. Just tell us what the checklist will say on these 3 items.
What I've heard is that y'all are generally satisfied with the proposals that are before you. I heard you, Mr. Chairman, ask for additional clarification about what kind of verification would be required to confirm that folks weren't having an adverse impact.
A hydraulic analysis will not have a significant impact on floodplain values.
Again, we can bring back language that that's how the council feels. Throughout the plan, we have identified materials that might be required, analyses that might be needed, conditions that would need to be demonstrated without specifying how they need to be done. If this one is at essential.
Well, and in fact, the plan calls for best available science, and that's a requirement in the very first GP1. So the general policy. So my assumption, if somebody just had their son write up a hydraulic analysis and it wasn't based on facts, it would be easily challenged because we have a requirement that any covered action, and these would only come to us if they were a covered action, must use best available science. So
I just suggest to you on language, since it is other state agencies that are likely going to be asked or arguably would pay attention to this, they will want to know what it is that's there.
So we could probably identify standards of practice.
I think you ought to think about it.
Language that is used by the flood board routinely. So those are those 2 items.
Okay,
I didn't hear any objections.
Can I ask one legal question on the second item? The language you're adding that this policy covers a proposed, this is the second option, covers a proposed action that would encroach upon one of the 3 floodplains listed above. We had the same kind of consideration when we talked about flow standards in the Delta. We know that the regulation will only, the Office of Administrative Law is going to only allow us to enforce the water standards that are there. What happens if another floodplain is identified by the Department of Water Resources, for example, as potential? Will we have to go back and amend the Delta plan? Will we have to?
Yes, we would.
And that seems, think about that. That seems improbable to me. You're talking about preventing encroachment, which is immediate intrusion onto a floodplain, which is a life, safety, and state interest issue. I don't know what the right answer is, but I just noticed. Think about the implication. Okay. Anything else? Ms. Marcus.
I'm just going over the notes. There's more that we talked about.
Yeah, there's much more.
Yeah, so
we were just talking about the items 1, 2, and 3, and then I assume we're going to go on from there.
Okay, those are 1, 2, and 3. Let's go on.
Do you want to summarize, Dan? Well, I'll talk about first the issue that Tom and Mike both raised, and we are going to attempt to be more straightforward in our language, and I will talk with Tom and or Mike about that language and bring something back to you in 2 weeks. So we'll do that. Then there was a lot of discussion, again, about linkage. There was one key issue is to find out how fast we can do the prioritization process that we have outlined there. And so that's really something that our technical staff, our engineering staff, will have to work with DWR on to validate the dates that we have there. I have the normal comments, although here it's it was more focused on linkage, but considering ecosystem restoration and how that linkage is to strengthen that ecosystem linkage there.
I also raised the point of whether appropriate cost-sharing ratios is part of our study on prioritization of state investments.
Right. And then the issue of making sure that we include more agencies in our list. In RR7, the setback levy criteria, we only talk about 4 state agencies, and so
That should be part of a group. We've also agreed to expand the stakeholders group, or was that on water quality?
You're talking about the implementation committee? We have a list of agencies.
No, I'm sorry, that was the water quality.
So, but in this case, they actually did bring up stakeholders as well as the Corps of Engineers.
So we should speed up the process, but add more people we consult with. I got it.
Right, and then you're going to try and call out this issue of the near-term actions more?
Yes. Although, one of the things I should say this, again, that the intent of the plan is to be a programmatic and foundational document. So our plan is to be bringing back to the council a whole list of recommended short-term actions that would be consistent with the plan so that we can take action sooner rather than later, and that kind of thing can be updated on a regular basis and is not part of this foundational document here. So that it was deliberate. We had reasons from CEQA, and there are a lot of good reasons to kind of say short-term actions need to come faster, sooner, and be perhaps independent of the more foundational document. Does that make sense?
It kind of does, but then it still leaves something
but we need to
lacking,
say it,
I
is
think.
what you're saying.
Just because it makes it look like we're just everything is way off there, as opposed to saying there are things that need to happen. Because we're already saying what we're going to do next year in some of these. I think we shouldn't each. What's that next time frame?
Well,
we're just not giving ourselves, or you're not giving yourselves enough credit for all the thinking and the stuff that you've done. And what you're trying to do is get a game plan for action actually happening.
And we've tried to do that again with the timelines that are in each chapter.
Yeah.
Which do list the set of near-term actions and the agencies who have lead responsibility for them.
Yeah.
We were terse in describing what those actions were, but
it does link to the chapter.
yeah, and we are trying to make sure we're
Okay.
posing.
But those are all fair comments, and that is, part of it is, you're right, we are so close to it, having read through it 200 times, that there are implications that jump to mind that aren't even necessarily there anymore. Mm-hmm. But we're there at one point with an earlier version.
That's
so
understandable.
That's...
Okay. Anything else? All right. Chapter 7 is done. Let us go to our next panel. And ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Hannock, if you would come up here, please. Mr. Zuckerman.
I had something I wanted to
Oh,
say.
I'm sorry. Excuse me. Hold on just for a minute. Mr. Zuckerman, back on Chapter 7.
Well, I really had something that spilled over from 7 into 8. But if you read
On Chapter 7 with spillover effect into 8.
read the
Mr.
document that I gave you yesterday,
Got it right here.
and it ties into the discussion you've just been having about near-term actions. I really, I don't think you have a finance plan in here, and I think everybody would agree with that. And I can understand the difficulty of it at this 5 minutes, coming up with a long-term financing plan. But I think what you could do is go through and organize the near-term actions that you've indicated at various places in your document and make a chapter out of it so that someone could read it, could say, yes, these are the things we're going to be trying to do right away, and this is our financing plan for doing that. Because there is a significant amount of money that is available to do some of these short-term things from monies that haven't yet been expended from Props 84 and 1E. And just to tie back into the Chapter 7 issue, that's one of the reasons we're so adamant about not putting obstacles in the face of doing levee projects, because there's a significant effort going on which I and many other people in the room probably are part of, to try to reach some consensus on some near-term actions that would involve a lot of levee work in the Delta. So when we get together and talk about this language, one of the things I'm going to be sensitive to is not that you don't forestall these efforts that are going on with existing funds in the hope that somebody is going to come down from heaven and describe a set of policies for you, which, given the breadth of the number of agencies that are involved in that, I think the 2015 time frame is probably ambitious rather than realistic. So anyway, those are my comments, and I think you need to do that in order to make this a real plan. Without financing, it's not going to be taken very seriously, and you need to have something real here.
Who's on the committee? That's finance.
Oh, yeah, we now have a different panel for finance.
Do you know the names?
And I don't remember the names right now. Cindy, could you remind me of who's... I know Ellen Hannock is one. So Charles is one. You are one, Mark.
You're one, aren't you, Mike?
I don't think Nelson.
And Barry Nelson is one. How's that?
I knew I wasn't getting off easy.
Okay. And I'm sure, Mike, if you want to stay up there, the council would love your input.
Mr. Ray.
Well, I didn't have much of an introduction for this discussion. The finance plan. We've received few comments on the finance plan other than people observing how sparse it is. In large part because important decisions have yet to be made.
Were these any of the same people that objected to the original consultant summary of optional funding sources, which drove us to put it in the appendix because they didn't like some of the ideas for funding that might affect them?
I don't know who those people were, having not been here for that hearing, but what we've realizing we had only a partial understanding of what a portion of things might cost. I think what we've tried to do in the plan is identify some principles for funding, the guiding principles that you've adopted long ago about beneficiaries' pay and stressors' pay. We've tried to identify some near-term funding requirements. We've identified by many standards, a very large amount of money that's being expended on Bay Delta work broadly writ now under the guise of the old CalFed program, which we track through our zero-based budget, $200 to $300 million a year, and a call for the development of a more detailed finance plan, which we would be able to do subsequent to the adoption of this plan. It would likely include a mix of attention on just sort of funding streams, as well as trying to understand some large projects and what kinds of funds they might need. My experience is certainly in the ecosystem restoration world. What's most important is identify a project and start patching together the money that makes it happen, rather than try to sit back and identify funding streams that may or may not be useful. So that's the gist of the recommendations that we put before you. And we don't have any changes proposed from the staff at this time on that.
Randy?
Yeah, before the panel begins, I'd just like to comment on Chapter 8. I think it's entirely inadequate, and we're going to be looking to this panel to help us develop a framework and recommendations that can be included in Chapter 8 that will lead this body unto a spreadsheet that will include an evaluation of all current spending in relation to the co-equal goals and any redirection of funding that should occur as a result of the new co-equal goals. 2, a list of all of the projects and actions that are called out in the Delta plan chapter by chapter, and then identify the sources of funding for each of those projects, each of those line items. And I think from the very beginning we've started off on the wrong foot. We've emphasized where we can find money. And that sends everybody into a defensive mode of, oh no, I'm not gonna put up any money. But I think if we identify what we're going to spend the money on, and if the Delta plan makes a case for the advisability and the benefits that can be derived from spending money on those projects, then the funding becomes less of a threat and is hopefully will be seen as more of a participation in a comprehensive plan that's leading to a better California. That's my vision for Chapter 8. And so as one council member, I'm asking each one of you to offer as many comments and directions that will lead us to developing 1, 2, 3, 4 recommendations to be included in the final draft that will lead us down that path. If you disagree, tell me. But I think I've talked to most of you about this at one point or another, and I think that it's really important because this will become the focal point of the Delta plan. And and I think that's where a lot of people have been waiting to see what this all means. So I look forward to your comments.
You start with that end down there?
Well, I'm going to weigh in on this. We do not have a short-term action plan. I'm deeply disappointed on that. We've talked about it many times before. Having said that, my experience in this business is a short-term action list is, generally speaking, a list of favored projects by people who propose them. It lacks coherence. They almost all lack coherence, and there is no sense in which another Christmas tree project list in which I have participated. The Delta Vision process was a classic example of including some Christmas tree ornaments in that fashion. That is not the way to do public policy. It may be the way it works in the legislature, but it's nuts. Practical problem. We are stuck in a process with a programmatic environmental impact report on a planning document. The more we convert it into something that appears to be a project, the obligation goes with it to analyze and to define the project with clarity, to analyze it specifically for purposes of the environmental impact report. So somebody says, I want to spend $5 million to dump rock somewhere in the Delta on some kind of island. That is a project. Do we really have the information needed? And so, as irritated as I am by the fact we don't have something like this, I think as a practical matter, it is far too late, unless we wish to delay the Delta plan for a whole lot longer, to avoid something expanded along the lines Randy indicated. But we will have to produce our short-term observation summaries, comments, recommendations probably after the Delta plan is adopted, unless we know enough about them now to analyze them as if they were clear enough to satisfy a project environmental impact definition. That's a real problem. It's a problem inherent in this crazy process where the legislature says do a plan, but the way the law is structured, that has driven us to an environmental impact report, which is really started as a project evaluation, not a programmatic evaluation. So I guess I'm frustrated with everything on this. It is too bad because that adds a sense of reality to this discussion. Having said that, when Randy and I went through that little subcommittee on early actions back in 2010 for 5 or 6 months, there were a lot of people with a lot of ideas. We got 36, 42 ideas, Randy. I can't really remember, something like that. Not a single one of them was shovel ready, not one. And most of them have been around for years, including the ones that are in the bill as important to the legislature, the barriers and the fish screen at Clifton Gordon. Everyone says, oh yeah, well, that's easy. Meaning, I agree with it, you ought to do it. But nobody has ever bothered to do the actual planning, the actual engineering, the actual evaluation sufficient to get legal clearance to do the darn project. Not one. And so we were left with modest successes on hassling emergency services to get some more money out to the counties for the telephone intercompatibility system. We prodded DWR to do what they were already in the way of doing, to get more rock piles in the Delta, and I think there was one other illustration, but they were very problematic. So I just caution you on, I like the idea a lot, but creating a laundry list of ideas of projects is a guaranteed way to take 4 years and have a laundry list of projects at the end, which may or may not serve any coherent purpose. Pat?
I'd like to focus on another part of what Randy said. And Phil, a long time ago when you and I co-taught a course at UC Berkeley, Aaron Wildowski's book that emphasized the analysis of public policy by asking the question, what problem are you trying to solve, and then looking at options and weighing those and so forth, as opposed to what you humorously characterized as the way people get elected often do it. And
including
that is,
me.
Yeah, including me. Well, we were at that time in that business, which is read a headline, introduce a bill. So I think what Randy's advising is that we've put a lot of analysis into what's wrong, and while there's some dispute, to be sure, about aspects of it, then looking at what are the central areas to remedy the deficiencies in our water system, recognizing the co-equal goals. And while the individual projects may have to await another day, even short-term actions for the reasons you stated, moving in a fashion to where solutions are identified and hopefully consensus develops around them is a good step towards then looking at how much it costs and where we should seek the money. So I think he's drawn our attention to focusing in that direction rather than immediately looking to how we develop a pot of money and then later figuring out what we think we want to do with it.
Okay. Patrick insisted I use athletic terminology in the debate, so one year our title was something about public policy, the scrum.
Yeah, so anyway, Phil said, can you come up with a title for the course? So we're teaching at UC Berkeley, and Phil had taught there for a while, but I hadn't. And I thought, well, let's see what it is. Well, sorting out the scrum of California politics on the theory that if you peeled away the layers of what goes on publicly, you
near
might
dead
get
bodies, one top
you
of the
might
other.
get to what's going on as we speak, as they put together a state budget in private, right? So that was the theory, and so we put it on the syllabus and handed it out to the students, and I thought it was pretty clever until I overheard a couple of students in the hallway say, so I said, sorting out the scrum, and I heard one student say to the other, are you going to take that scum class? So we dropped it.
Okay.